Display abominations in tech is one of my favorite areas to explore. PlayStations with network attached storage, Steam Decks with external GPUs, and super powerful brand new GPUs with old school processors. And that's what we have here today, a Core 2 quad being the anemic supporting legs holding up the torso of an RTX 5090. And the entire experiment is sponsored by Thermaltake. More on them in a bit. When the 50 series launched, it actually didn't have support for these ancient chips released nearly 2 decades ago now. Yes, please go get your colonoscopy soon. But 5 months after the launch of the 50 series, NVIDIA drivers dropped the need to support the POP-CNT instruction, making it so the newest GPUs are able to be paired together with the archaic processors, like a Bill Belichick situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
But also like Bill Belichick,
Not talking about this.
a bunch of games just don't work with this combo either. More on that in a bit. We last did this experiment all the way back with the 3090 Ti, but we wanted to revisit it because there's been a few changes in the gaming landscape since then. More games support ray tracing, but now we have the bonus of fake AI frames being added into the equation with multi-frame gen. But that's not the only modern part of this system that we've got today. Not just the new 50 series. The Core 2 Quad Q9550 with its P43 motherboard are going right into the beautiful new colorway of the Thermaltake Tower 600. That's right, we've got the future dusk version of it. Thermaltake also supplied us with their 1300 watt TOF power TF3 80 plus titanium power supply and a dozen of their CT120EX fans in their Bumblebee colorway. A beautiful combo with the future dusk. And just a massive shout out to Thermaltake Mike, who was able to source us a super clean Blue Orb 2 for cooling the Q9550. Yeah, Thermaltake's been making good looking products for many PC generations. But even though we have all of the parts, building the system did have some unique challenges. A bunch is still the same in the mid 2020s as it was in the early 2000s. Standards are nice and helpful. 24-pin motherboard power connectors there, the 4 or 8-pin CPU connectors, easy to plug in, but there's a ton that's missing. Significantly fewer fan headers, lack of USB-C, lack of USB 3.0, so no fast accessories that require significant bandwidth, no addressable RGB, and even limited PCI Express. This board only supports PCIe Gen 2, so we're not just gonna hit a CPU bottleneck, but also a bandwidth one on the 5090. Then there's extra ports that no one knows what they do anymore that are on the rear I/O. You got IDE, serial, PS2, and the goated display connector, all just sitting there. We're also missing M.2 drives, and we'll be stuck with SATA 2, not the 3 you find on modern motherboards. So that means the SSD is gonna be throttled down to just 300 megabytes per second, about 60% of what it can typically do. And another area I wasn't expecting incompatibility was with the front panel connectors. A lot of modern cases, like the Tower 600, are shipping them with these combo connectors that are simpler, but it's not the same pin out as on these old boards, so you can't just put it on. I was limited to jump starting the computer with a good old handy screwdriver. But despite the challenges, missing features and obsolete interfaces, once it was built, it sure does look gorgeous. And that's mostly thanks to the Tower 600, the main focus of Thermaltake's sponsorship. They're up to 13 colors on this octagonal ATX chassis. Its vertical layout means that you get a unique look at your components from other cases, but it also leverages the physics of heat rising to make it pretty effective at cooling. You know, on top of supporting 13 total fans. The glass and other side panels are tool-free to pop on and off for smooth and easy installation. It was a breeze to take them off so that the glass wasn't reflecting while filming this A-roll, but you can also stuff in your max 400mm GPU or your up to 420mm radiators, no problem in this interior. And when you're not stuffing in a CPU and motherboard that are old enough to vote, you can hook up a ton of front I/O with a USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type-C port, 4 USB 3.0 Type-A's, and HD audio, all right there. And if you go with a back connector motherboard, it's got the cutouts for that too. If you're stuck between old and new hardware, the Tower 600 does still support 2 2.5-inch drives or 1 3.5-inch drive on its primary drive plate, with a sneaky extra plate down in the bottom right for the 2.5-inch. And it has dust filters galore to help prevent the invasion of small particles onto your precious ancient hardware. And if you want to spice up the Tower 600 even more, we mentioned the plethora of colors, but there's also the option of a 3.9-inch LCD screen kit to add some splash, or the chassis stand kit to give you a more typical orientation of the case and your components. So whether you're a numpty like me who's building a super old brand new computer, or you're a sensible individual looking to have a stunner of a PC, the Tower 600 is perfect for so many situations, color schemes, and environments. You can check it and the other Thermaltake parts we've used in the video down in the video description. And again, big thanks to Thermaltake for helping to make this video possible, and Thermaltake Mike for going the extra mile on getting us the Blue Orb 2. But now let's go over the rest of the system specs. We wanted to give the Core 2 Quad its best chance at performing with the 5090. So we made sure to pick up a Mambo that supported DDR3, since these chips were in the transitional generation between DDR2 and 3. Most boards you find for the Q9550 are just the DDR2 variant. But we have 16 gigabytes of DDR3 1600 Crucial Ballistics RAM. There's also a 1TB SATA 3 2.5-inch SSD, and the other Thermaltake goodies that we've already mentioned. And then the GPU is the creme de la creme Asus ROG Astral 5090 liquid cooled version, perfect to place in the Tower 600 with its 360mm radiator. Building the system really wasn't an issue at all. The Tower 600 was super easy to build with, but problems quickly popped up as soon as we started to try to use this thing. Problem 1, Windows installation didn't really struggle, but as soon as we tried to download anything, we were immediately CPU bottlenecked. Turns out the 4-core, 4-thread, 2.83 GHz CPU just can't download things at full gigabit speeds. I didn't expect my internet to get throttled, but we were at under half a gigabit, with the average speed being under a quarter of a gigabit. Thankfully, it wasn't the SSD bottlenecking download speed, since SATA 2 wouldn't throttle until about 2.5 gigabits of internet speed. So after waiting way too long to get our drivers, updates, and games installed, we quickly ran into problem number 2. Again, this is like a day or two late. A bunch of the games I wanted to test just straight up don't work. Cyberpunk 2077 flatline, Witcher 3, no. Some games would indicate they're running, but just do nothing. Something about not having the right instruction sets. The first one we got to run though, at least in the testing suite I had, was Oblivion Remastered, a modern title with support for the old CPU. And that led to problem number 3, shader compilation. While we wait for Microsoft's advanced shader delivery system to make things better, it's still done at launch with games. Dozens of minutes wasted to get the game to turn on the first time. So I'm days into downloading games, and now I'm half a workday into trying to get any game to just get me into gameplay. And I'm also gonna lump in problem 3.5 here, stupid long loading times. Skipping cutscenes in GTA 5 to start the game literally took 15 minutes. There was a lot of waiting. So downloading took forever, trying to find a game that could load took forever, loading the game took forever, getting into gameplay took forever, but we did get into several different games. An exciting time after such a long wait. The anticipation had me itching to start playing, but then we were smacked with problem 4. Bad FPS. And I don't mean low FPS. I can tolerate low FPS. I've played plenty of game at sub 30 frames per second because I couldn't afford a good system back in the day. My first playthrough of The Witcher 3 was on a crappy laptop where I was probably averaging in the 20s. I played Team Fortress 2 on very, very poor graphics, averaging probably 15 back in the day. But it's bad FPS because it's inconsistent. Sometimes it's smooth, no frame dips. Sometimes it's stuttery. Moving the camera is rough. It seems like RAM loading problems are likely here. The speed just isn't enough, even if we have 16 gigs to load into. Remember, we're running at nearly a quarter of the speed of what a decent modern RAM kit pulls off these days. It was just an absolute nightmare. And it was in all modern games we tried. Nothing was easy on the brain, but it was easy on the eyes because max settings with ray tracing actually ran. Unfortunately, it doesn't get better if you drop the settings. Everything just still was a stuttery mess. And all of that was there until AI got turned on, which is problem 5. 50 series supports not only frame gen, but multi-frame gen, getting 3 extra AI frames for every 1 reel. And this is the first time I wanted it turned on. I'm actually thankful for NVIDIA's fake frames in this situation. And that's the problem. I never expected to be in this situation where I could say I found a legitimate use case. Sure, it was an artifacting, goofy looking, smeary mess, but it looked and felt smoother to play. The frame rate wasn't significantly more consistent, but it fixed enough to make it so I felt like I could actually drive the car in GTA 5 Enhanced. Without it, I struggled to even pay attention because there were spikes of frame rates that made it so that I could really not actually play the game. And I know the typical experience is that bad input leads to bad output with multi-frame gen, but in this situation, NVIDIA's DLSS 4 was the only thing that actually made it so we had a tolerable output. Smoothing out the frames was just what I needed to get the 5090 to be an enjoyable graphics card in this situation. Old games though? They ran like a treat. So let's go over a few performance numbers that I got while testing out various different games, some modern, some older. GTA 5 Enhanced, we tested out 4K ultra settings with no frame gen turned on. We averaged 12.1 FPS. Oh, with the 1% lows dipping down to 7.8. Again, just not a consistent time at all. Once we turned on the 4x frame gen with DLSS 4, we averaged 46.8 FPS, which is roughly 4 times no frame gen. However, the 1% lows still stayed at 8.4. Again, it didn't quite fix all of the stuttering, but it was fixed enough that, again, I could play the game. Then in Black Myth Wukong, with 4K cinematic ray tracing, no frame generation, again, highest possible settings, we averaged 12 FPS with a 6.1 1% low. So still, again, slow and pretty minimal. Now, Black Myth Wukong didn't have the option for multi-frame gen, just regular frame gen, and that about doubled our FPS to 23, and it also over doubled our 1% lows, bringing it to 14.6. Again, smoothing out the experience, making it so that I could actually whack people with the monkey stick. Then in Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor, a significantly older title, but it's kind of modern. At 4K ultra settings, the very highest, we got a 79.2 FPS average, with 56.4 being the 1% lows. Totally playable. And then Portal, yeah, the original Portal, not the RTX version, because no matter what we did, we could not get Half-Life RTX, Portal RTX, or even Quake 2 RTX running. At 4K highest with the original Portal, we averaged 292.6 FPS. There were some few frame dips. It was not perfectly smooth. The 1% lows ended up being 36.2. And then in Tomb Raider 2013, this is, mind you, 5 years after the CPU came out, but 12 years before this graphics card came out. At 4K Ultimate, we averaged 138.6 FPS, got 1% lows of 58.5. So all in all, you know, revisiting the past is nice because it lets you know how good you have it now. I'm way more thankful for the real system that's going to be going into the Tower 600. We're going to be upgrading the Core 2 Quad Q9550 to the Ryzen 7 9800X3D, twice the cores, 4 times the threads, and 8 times the amount of cache. The P43 motherboard is turning into an X870E ROG Crosshair Hero with Gen 5 PCI Express support instead of Gen 2. The 16 gigabytes of DDR3 1600 is morphing into 96 gigabytes of DDR5 6600. That's 6 times the capacity and over 4 times the speed. The 1 terabyte SATA SSD is bumping up to a 4 terabyte WD Black SN850X, and the Blue Orb 2 is being replaced by the Thermaltake MagFlow 360 Ultra. Although I'm a bit sad on the last upgrade, I really fricked with the Blue Orb 2. It kept the Q9550 plenty cool, but unfortunately, AM5 compatibility isn't one of the features of this beast. So one of Thermaltake's best modern coolers is here for the 9800X3D. And thankfully, because the Tower 600 supports a radiator on either side of the case, we can fit both the Astral Liquid Cool card and the MagFlow.
Maybe I ought to go back and look at your notes.
And now that we have the new thing put together, let's see how it stacks up against the Core 2 Quad. So to complete the experiment and to satisfy my curiosity, the first step was to take the 9800X3D in this system and turn it into an effective Core 2 Quad. So we got rid of half the cores, turned off simultaneous multi-threading, and downclocked the bad boy to 2.83 gigahertz to essentially be the same specs as that old Intel processor. Now, obviously, the 9800X3D is a lot newer, also has the 3D V cache to make it so that it's gonna perform better, but I just wanted to see exactly where are we limited here. And there were some intriguing numbers that came out of this. GTA 5 5, we saw about a 474% increase between the Core 2 Quad and the quad-core X3D chip, averaging 69.5 FPS, whereas the Core 2 Quad only gave us 12.1, and again, even without frame generation, the X3D chip beating out the Core 2 Quad. In Black Myth Wukong, it's a little bit less of a gap, 166%, coming in at 32 FPS at the same settings. Shadow of Mordor saw a 221% increase, going from 79.2 on the Core 2 Quad all the way up to 254 on that X3D chip that's cosplayed as a Core 2 Quad. And the most interesting result was actually Portal, where we saw that the average FPS went down by 2%, but the gaming was significantly better because the 1% lows were about 6 times as high, coming in close to 200 FPS, whereas with the Core 2 Quad, it was at 36.2. And just as a note, Portal RTX did run with the X3D chip, and it ran pretty dang well. And then 2013's Tomb Raider, we saw a 181% increase, coming in at 390 FPS average. So that's all fun and games. The X3D chip, when it's Core 2 Quad levels of specs, does still outperform it by quite a bit, but there's also still more room to go. So we re-enabled all of the cores, giving you 8 cores, 16 threads, and then made sure that we had PBO enabled for the overclocking, so we weren't just downclocked to that 2.83 gigahertz. And what we saw was in GTA 5, we got an additional 86% FPS, coming in at 129.7 in the exact same setup. Black Myth Wukong, exactly the same, 32 FPS average. Turns out we weren't CPU bottlenecked at 4K, highest settings possible there. Shadow of Mordor, we got another 59%, coming in at 405 FPS average. Turns out the X3D had a little bit of legroom left there. In a very similar situation with Portal, the FPS was slightly higher for the average, but also the 1% lows were also higher, so it was just a more consistent experience overall. And then finally in Tomb Raider, we saw an additional roughly 10% gain, coming in at 427.6 FPS. So the X3D chip obviously just crushes the Core 2 Quad. And honestly, modern parts are nice. We've come a long way in terms of designs, engineering, and performance. Clock for clock, the X3D chip is just a powerhouse when it comes to being able to play the games with the 5090. Obviously, a lot of that has to do with things like instruction sets, the faster RAM, the ability for the 5090 to not be bottlenecked on the PCI Express 5.0 lanes. But even with all of the changing that's happened in the decades since the Core 2 Quad launched, do you know what stayed consistent? Thermaltake. They've been making fantastic parts for gaming PCs for decades at this point. And the Core 2 Quad honestly isn't terrible for a nearly 20-year-old chip. It can't quite keep up in 2025. It can't even run a bunch of programs, but the games it did run, I could see myself playing it on the Core 2 Quad. I'm not gonna, since we have things like the 9800 X3D, but I could. Speaking of having things like the 9800 X3D, we'll be giving away this exact PC to one of you over on our Twitch streams at some point in the near future as part of our monthly giveaways. You can check out twitch.tv/UFDtech for more info on that to get the specific details. And again, big thanks to Thermaltake and Thermaltake Mike for making this video possible. Whoever wins this Tower 600 is gonna love the heck out of it.